From the Lincoln Journal-Star, this is the Life in the Red podcast with Luke Mullin and Amie Just.
Hey folks, welcome back to the Life in the Red podcast. Luke Mullin and Amie Just back with you for another episode breaking down a busy period in Nebraska sports. Again, that time of the year, a lot going on in a lot of different areas. Today, previewing the stretch run for Husker men's and women's hoops, Big Ten tournament, NCAA tournament here coming up in the month of March, of course. Baseball and softball going on right now. Other updates to get to as well. But as we get here last week of February, how are we doing, Amie? Good?
I am ready
Hanging in there.
Take a little break for a minute.
Yes, definitely. So we'll be looking ahead, of course, to the next couple of weeks of Nebraska basketball. Hopefully, for all of you viewers out there, again, we'll preview those Big Ten tournaments when they do come up. But we'll get into that here at the tail end of the show today. As I said, lots of different updates around the sports to go through. So as we start off with our week in Nebraska sports, talking a little Husker volleyball, you can look for a full podcast. Myself and Brent Wagner, we broke down, of course, the John Cook, Danny Busboom, Kelly news a couple of weeks ago. But the first match is that Danny Busboom Kelly is going to coach Pinnacle Bank Arena, the AVCA Showcase super loaded tournament field that was officially announced today. This week, I should say, August 22nd to 24th, those matches here in Lincoln. Nebraska, the headliner, playing Pittsburgh and Stanford. The other matches at that event, Florida will play Stanford, Creighton will play Penn State, Kansas will play Vanderbilt, and Florida also playing Pittsburgh. You look at that field and man, 3 days of fantastic college volleyball that are going to be going on here in Lincoln.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing. All huge powerhouses. And then for Vanderbilt, bringing back their program after not having it for 40 years. It's going to be very special for them to kick off their new season there as well. So I'm excited about it. I'm not ready for it yet. But Brent Wagner wrote a really good inside piece as to how it all kind of came together. That is on journalstar.com and Husker Extra for you guys. But yeah, I'm excited. It should be fun. And DBK knows a little something about Pittsburgh, considering they were conference rivals for many years.
They're sick of seeing her, most definitely. Some great matchups between those programs. So yeah, looking forward to that with those matches announced. And talking about schedule changes, moving on to football, some big news about the Nebraska non-conference schedule. Had a big, marquee home and home set up with Tennessee in 2026 and 27. That series is now off, replaced on the Nebraska schedule. Home games against Bowling Green in Miami, Ohio. And there's a lot of different reasons, that we can get into for that. But the first thing I got to say is for the fans, I mean, that's going to be pretty disappointing, Tennessee off the schedule.
Oh, yeah. Incredibly disappointing. You want to see premier, weird matchups that don't happen very often. I know I, as a football fan, love seeing the weird non-conference games against teams that have never played one another. For example, my dream is Michigan LSU because they've never played in football ever.
Oh.
So I'm holding out hope that one day that may happen. But yeah, I was disappointed by it, but it makes sense, right? The original contract for this series goes back to 2006.
Yeah, these things are scheduled so far in advance.
Well, so this was supposed to be 2016, 2017-ish before Tennessee approached Nebraska to push it back because they wanted to play, I think, West Virginia at the racetrack there, have 150 plus thousand people. And Nebraska was like, yep, we can do that. Move it back 10 years. So from what it sounds like, Nebraska wanted to push it back again due to the changes coming to Memorial Stadium that will reduce capacity by about 20%. So they wanted to get a few more home games for one of those years to kind of help offset costs or help offset the bottom line that's going to be affected when the stadium is not at the number that it is used to for the operating budget. So, but Tennessee didn't want to do it, which I understand. That's really close. It's really soon. It's hard to fill that hole, but Nebraska having to fork over quite a bit of money to get out of those games.
Yeah, I think certainly part of it's, from that revenue standpoint about, missing out on a lot of those ticket sales while they are renovating Memorial Stadium and, adding another home game. That's huge. And I think part of it too is this era of college football that we're in, not that this was the main reason, but, in the college football playoff era, really, a lot of coaches have said this. Where's the incentive to go play a good team in non-con? It's a lot easier to maybe schedule somebody who you think is going to be an easy win, but we'll see. Oftentimes that's not the case. Those programs can be a lot stronger than you expect. Those kind of trap games too. But
Northern Illinois against Notre Dame,
absolutely,
for example,
you could have lots of different examples, but. I think part of it too is with that revenue. You talk about, hey, we're getting into a time in college football where you're paying your roster $20 million a year. You still want to be profitable. Troy Dannon spoke about this. You got to find those revenue streams. And so I think what everybody knows here on Lincoln, of course, is how impactful those home games are for local businesses, for the university, for so much. So I think just the priority for them, I think, was to protect, those revenue streams and make sure that this athletic department is going to be sustainable through the period of renovation that they're going to go through.
Yeah, it's already going to be expensive. And then when you have the domino effect of not having as many fans as you would normally like to be there because, you can't fit the same amount of people in a stadium that is not completely there. So without, charging a bunch of extra, and nobody wants to do that, right? So yeah, it's off in the future, but it'll be here before we know it.
Absolutely. So yeah, those coaching, those schedule changes, those did recently come in. And as we wrap up our football discussion today, we heard from some of the new members of this Nebraska football coaching staff, the associate head coach Phil Snow, outside linebackers coach Phil Simpson, and wide receiver coach DeKel Shorts. And I think all three of them, these are guys who had some experience with Matt Rule or with different members of the staff, Dana Holgerson and Shorts example. So they come into the program, kind of knowing what's expected of them, but still they have some big goals for the rooms, or for Phil Snow, kind of the big long-term vision of this program. There's going to be a lot expected of these new hires.
Yeah, and I think that, getting to talk to them today, I was really impressed with DeKel Shorts. I had a chance to watch him in college. He killed my Kansas Jayhawks in many games.
It all comes back to Kansas.
It always comes back to Kansas. But yeah, no, he was really impressive today. I thought he was really thoughtful. I was encouraged by what he had to say. He unprompted brought up perimeter blocking, which as listeners
points for that.
As listeners of the pod know, one of my biggest gripes from offense last season. So liked him a lot. What you see is what you get with Snow, just a grizzled vet, old school guy. And good for Phil to come back. It's like he never left.
Definitely. Yeah, I think Phil Snow, that elder statesman, the guy who you can maybe just turn to for some advice, that's going to be so big for Matt Rule. And, they've had such a long working relationship together, obviously very aligned on what they want out of this Nebraska defense. And just to echo that too, I did think DeKel Shorts, he was honest in how he appraised that room, that, yeah, there's a lot of talent, but, you really don't know how it's going to shake out at this point with all these transfers coming in, the young guys in this program, and that one senior, Dane Key, on the roster. So just talking about how he wants to approach that room, I think it was very smart, the long-term approach he's going to have there with those guys. And again, this football team, it's February, but it's only a few weeks before spring football. We'll start here in March. Again, they're going through workouts right now, those mat drills and some limited work there that is going on inside that Nebraska football facility. As terms of moving on to the spring sports that are going on right now, some baseball and softball updates for you. Starting off with the baseball team, pretty strong opening weekend to the year, but crumbled in this most recent Saturday doubleheader to Louisiana, Nebraska, 1-3 on the weekend, and tough weekend coming up. Number 2 LSU, one of 3 opponents on the schedule. So really, Nebraska needed to get back on track. And preseason, top 25 expectations for that squad. Non-con always difficult, but they're going to need to get back on track. Versus, you look at the softball team, 3 weekend tournaments, 3 winning records, a lot of good stuff going on for Nebraska softball. They're ranked number 18 in the nation, and Jordy Ball All-American pitcher. She's been pitching at that All-American level again.
Yeah, she has looked incredible. And not just in the circle. It's been weird watching her at first base, but
Yep.
I like it. Like, it's weird.
She's a great player user, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's so weird, but I really like it. They threw her out there in a fall game that we were both at, and we're like, what is happening? But it feels natural now.
Yep. She's an athlete. She's a competitor.
She can do it all.
Yeah.
I mean, you could probably put her in outfield if you
I
needed
think
her.
so, yeah.
Like, she'd do whatever.
Yeah. And it's been really impressive, as you said, the combination of pitching and hitting, and the hitting has been contagious.
Oh my goodness.
They had a ridiculous weekend in New Mexico with home runs. It was 19, 20 home runs. I can't remember the exact statistic, but
a lot.
yeah. The ball was flying out of the park, and leading the way is shortstop Ava Kuzak. And I talked to her at practice yesterday, told her, hey, by the way, you're tied for the nation lead in home runs. She was like, oh yeah, that's nice. I was like, oh yeah, and you've hit more home runs in the first 14 games this season than you did all last year. She's like, oh yeah, that's cool. So top home run hitter in the nation, Ava Kuzak, 10 home runs. And
she's so fun.
Yeah, just phenomenal.
What a great pickup.
Yeah, hitting 475 out of that leadoff spot there at shortstop. And
that's so crazy.
Before the season, Rhonda Revelle said, oh, we don't want to compare her to Billy Andrews because they're different players. And it's like, what the heck? You just got one of the best shortstops in college softball replacing, one of the best shortstops in program history. Really nice for Nebraska softball to go through that transition. And with everybody hitting, pitching staff doing well. They're number 18 in the nation, as I said, and some big competition on the way this weekend. South Dakota State, Missouri, Oklahoma State, and Wichita State, the weekend opponents, most of those NCAA tournament teams last year, and a ranked opponent as well in Oklahoma State. They're on the radar. So another big weekend coming up for Husker softball.
Yeah, but the way they've been playing, this can continue to cement what they think will be possible.
Yeah, and the losses have been close too. They've certainly been close in all their losses. So a lot for Rhonda Revelle and that team to take into the next week of the season. And those are our updates around Husker sports. And now to get into the Husker hoops discussion, we'll start on the women's side of things. And it's kind of been an interesting last couple of weeks for them. You have those two really high scoring games that lead to wins on the road at Maryland, which was, that's a big time win.
Huge.
Yeah, credit for them for going in and winning that game. That was really nice to watch. And then the overtime win over Oregon, gritted that one out. Tough one as well. And then really, I thought a kind of confusingly poor loss to Washington on Senior Day most recently.
Yeah, Alexis went down briefly. Didn't feel super great. And then in the third quarter, and it really got away from him there. Alexis ended up coming back in, but it was far too gone. Nebraska only scored 5 points. Sorry, not 4, 5 points in that third quarter. And at one point, they were on a just weird 30 to 4 run. Yeah, not ideal there for Nebraska. It sucks to lose on Senior Day. They'll always remember that, but yeah, very, very strange loss for them. But hopefully, they should hopefully get Britt Prince back. She'd been out of the lineup for the last few games after sustaining an ankle injury a couple weeks ago. Last week, time runs together for me. So with this week off, the hope is that she should be back against Northwestern, and they need her.
Yeah, the injuries have obviously hit this team hard this year. You think about the players that they lost for the season. And just to go back to Senior Day, you wrote a really nice story about Alexis Markowski and her, her final home game there as well. Just from what we've seen from her last few years, how impressive is that career that she's put together here in Nebraska uniform?
It's amazing. She's just been reliable and steady her entire time. She has 51 career double-doubles. No player who has worn a Nebraska uniform, man or woman, has had more than 40. 2 have had 40. No one more than that until Alexis. So that in of itself, I think, speaks volumes of what she's been able to do. I think she is criminally underrated in the national landscape of women's college basketball. And I think people are taking her for granted.
Yeah, I can't do the math on whatever it is games played. But what does that mean? A double every 2.5 games.
Just about.
Yeah, that is incredible track record. And of course, it's not like every game that she's not getting a double. She's 8 boards, points. Been so
she's
consistent.
Had a lot of close ones too.
Yeah, been so consistent for this team, and they've needed her throughout this season. And as we look to the future for this Nebraska women's basketball team, their final Big Ten regular season game is this Sunday at Northwestern. Very big for the Big Ten tournament seeding. A win there, and of course, other games will impact things, but a win there and Nebraska could avoid that first round Big Ten tournament matchup as well. And looking forward to the NCAA tournament as well. Current bracketology has them kind of about the 10 seed. It's one of those teams still getting the bye, not necessarily there on that play-in game, but that game against Northwestern, the Big Ten tournament, what do you want to see from this Nebraska women's basketball team to go into the postseason still on a strong note?
Yeah, they need to squeeze out a win this week just to get last week's taste out of their mouth. And then I think they need to win 1 or 2 games in the Big Ten tournament. The Big Ten is going to have a ton of representation in the NCAA tournament. And for Nebraska to be one of those 10, 11, 12 teams that are up for consideration there, they need to finish strong, even though you've got several players out with injury and then other players who are dealing with stuff that's affecting them, whether that be Britt or other people. They got to find a way to win.
Yeah, the concern is you just don't want to be dragged, back into the bubble conversation. Just pick up a win or 2 and you really solidify that seed. So yeah, that game against Northwestern, very important this Sunday. And talking about teams that could be on the tournament bubble, it's looking increasingly that way for the men's basketball team. After they took down Northwestern, they followed that up with back-to-back losses to Penn State and Michigan. The most recent, incredibly low-scoring, kind of ugly game of basketball.
Kind of. You're being nice.
Some people love the games in the 40s. That's old school Big Ten basketball right there.
Big Ten West football right
Absolutely.
There.
Yeah.
Very defensive heavy, very ugly. Neither team shot very well, and it was an incredible missed opportunity for Nebraska to pull that one out.
Yeah. They've been without Burke Buchtengel as well for a few games.
He played and was a huge help. I think he was a big reason as to why they remained competitive in that game. Yes, he went 0 of 10 from the floor, but his defense was absolutely needed. And, on offense, he, stretched Michigan's defense a little bit because you have to account for him even when he isn't shooting very well.
Yep. And, when Nebraska was on this long winning streak, suddenly the NCAA tournament was looking like, they just got to pick up a couple wins here down the stretch. Well, 17-11 overall, 7-10 in conference. They have Minnesota, Ohio State, and Iowa, final 3 regular season games. How many of those do they need to win?
I think they need to get to 20.
Yeah, 19 was kind of the number that some people were throwing out there.
Yeah, 19, and then you pick up one in the Big Ten tournament. But for me, all 3 of their upcoming opponents are in the logjam at the bottom of the Big Ten with them. Not at the very bottom, obviously, but flirting with the bubble of not making the Big Ten tournament.
Yep.
So if these next 2 weeks don't go well, it's not like Nebraska could just miss out on March. They could miss out on the Big Ten tournament too. So I don't think that will happen. I think they will find a way to win 1 or 2 of these. They have the capability to win all 3 of them, but they also have the capability to lose all of them. I don't know who they are. I don't think they do either. So it's going to be a very interesting last couple of weeks of the season.
Yeah, I think that idea could win all 3, could lose all 3. That's just this Nebraska team, most definitely.
Yeah, if I had to pencil it in, just my guess is they'll beat Minnesota and Iowa, and they'll lose to Ohio State.
Yeah, well, each of these games so huge because, again, depending on the bracketology, they're last 4 in. They're on that 11 seed line right now. Could they play their way up to a 10? Can they solidify their spot? Certainly. And can they also end up on the other side of the bubble? it's possible as well. Again, Minnesota, Ohio State, and Iowa, those final 3 games for the Huskers here in the next 2 weeks. So that is your Husker Hoops update. And as always, all those games, all the bracketology, the relevant updates, we will have those for you at journalstar.com. But that's going to do it for today's episode of the Life in the Red podcast. Appreciate all of you listeners and viewers coming back to us once again. And we'll see you next time for another episode. See you then.
Thank you for listening to this week's Life in the Red podcast. Our theme music is composed by Sasha Indy. The stories continue on journalstar.com.